Our module Projects Works has had its origin with customers of the areas of civil construction and electrical works of large size, as well as with the implementation of information technology projects. It then evolved into more diverse areas, and nowadays it's adaptable to a wide variety of contexts that are briefly characterized by having a set of outputs, items to be realized, by needing for this purpose a set of correlated inputs, by optionally having technical relations, coefficients among the items to be produced and the inputs, which enable their automatic calculation. These inputs to be realized and their respective inputs are managed under our concept of contract, which allows an easy integration of the module projects and works into accounting and budgeting, human resources, and all areas in which the concept of contract is present. Additionally, we can define events, connections, and informational as well as documental items associated with contracts. We can create chains of facts from events associated with projects works that we consider relevant, such as contracts, meetings, decisions, among others. We can complement the information on the project work with connections. For instance, we can identify the developer, the designer, the supervisor, and so on, with connections to third parties. We can add comments and relevant notes by using informational items, as well as identify and control relevant documents for the project work. Let's consider the architecture of the module Project Works. We can, therefore, map any project work by using the architecture synthesized in here. Please note that the project work is a contract that has items to be realized and inputs associated to it. We can establish technical relations and coefficients among the items to be realized and inputs. Then there are still events, connections, and informational and documental items to complete the information on the project work. However, there are still something very important and essential for the management of the module projects works. First, the subsystem of products, services, and resources, as the project's works, and particularly the inputs, are closely related to this subsystem. And second, the several types of commercial and operational documents, very often arranged in chains of documents, are associated to projects works in many scopes. The life cycle of projects works is largely mirrored in these documents. Although our module Project Works has a very diversified application, the activities of an organization should be well analyzed in order to check whether and under which circumstances this module should be used. Let's see. In an organization, in terms of the architecture of our solutions, we can consider three levels at which activities are developed and reflected. At level 1, there is the structure with emphasis on organization units and activities, mirrored in accounting and budget. At level 2, contracts, according to the meaning our solutions give to this concept. It is at this level that the module Projects Works is. At level 3, documents, which mirror in detail what happens at an elementary level. Many of the activities are often mirrored only in terms of documents that are directly reflected in the structure. In many cases, this is enough. It is possible to map large parts of businesses, particularly with document chains. However, this connection between documents and contracts may be direct and does not imply the use of the module projects works. Still regarding documents, note that despite the capacity of document chains in mapping most of the business transaction at issue, it is wise to associate documents with contracts as much as possible, so as to provide management with a more aggregate outlook of the business transaction, which single documents are not capable of doing. For example, by associating insurance invoices, rentals, maintenance, systematic supplies, and other recurrent invoices with contracts, I will be able to have at my disposal the amounts spent on each contract in a given period of time, and even under a multi-annual perspective. Moreover, associating documents with contracts enables one of the easiest ways to automate the accounting recording of documents. Just indicate in the contracts the accounts to be operated, and that's it. This is enough for the system to ensure their automatic accounting recording. Let's go back to the slide we were analyzing. Here on the right are operations and micro-operations. Operations are a portion of business transactions presenting some significance and complexity. They consist of micro-operations which, at first glance, may appear similar to project and work items to be realized. So when document chains are not enough to support the desired goals, it is important to consider whether we should use operations, micro-operations, or projects works. In our solutions for logistics, for example in port management, an operation is defined as a portion of the business transaction associated with a ship's port of call and with a solicitor, customer. An unloading operation is divided into micro-operations such as delivery ex-quay, slinging, parking, peer-to-house service, etc. There is a catalog of predefined micro-operations, and they are used to arrange operations in terms of initial and final planning, realization, valorization, and billing. But what distinguishes then operations, compositions of micro-operations, from projects, works, and their items? These operations are fundamentally different from projects' works because of their recurrent, relatively simple, and highly standardized nature, such as in industry. There is a catalog of micro-operations. Due to their reduced temporal dimension, such as in days, and due to their reduced complexity, there are fewer micro-operations. Going back to the slide we were analyzing, in the center, at intermediate level, there are projects, works, along with their items to be realized and inputs. Only part of the activities of organizations justifies its treatment by this module. Naturally, in case there are typical works such as building construction and large electrical works from which the module came from, it is easy to decide what should be treated in here. However, the circumstances are not so clear in most organizations. The first element to be taken into account in order to determine whether that situation demands the use of the module projects works is the analysis of the degree of specific information of the project work to be registered. First, if you want to use events, connections, and informational items to improve the associated information. Second, if we need items to be realized. For instance, whether there is the need of controlling them time-wise, having schedules, measuring levels of accomplishment, valuing them. Note that in the case of the micro-operations mentioned above, the control is simple. They either have been realized or not, or are being realized. All boils down to a basic status code. Third, whether we have to consider the need of controlling the specific inputs of the project work at issue. not an undifferentiated consumption that adds cost to the project work, for this could be done with simple documents, but as elements that are intended to be kept and controlled in a differentiated manner, usually because their management, legal and/or financial parameterization require them to be so. In general, it takes a minimum differentiated control of inputs in terms of labor, materials, supplies, equipment, outsourcing, subcontracts, and, less frequently, financing expenses. As the need of using the module projects works has become clear, this powerful tool that should be preserved for the circumstances it has been designed, let's move on and illustrate the use of the facilities of its base menu. We will then begin by illustrating the features of this module. Let's see its base menu. First, the project as a contract, along with information associated from its respective connections, events, and informational items. Then, the items to realize and inputs. Planning and follow-up. When it comes to planning, the distribution of items on the timeline is essential, which enables different schedules to be obtained. Realization schedules, that is, the quantities of items to realized. Consumption schedules, that is, the quantities of inputs used. Expenditure schedules, that is, valued consumption. And revenue schedules, that is, sales revenues or other ones. When it comes to the follow-up, those miscellaneous controls are essential whether in terms of project as a whole or in terms of items and inputs. Control of quantities, expenditures, revenues, and profitabilities. Finally, statistical reports bearing in mind the facilities of the base menu presented earlier, let's start with an example of a simple work with inputs only. This is a very simple project, the installation of 10 light fixtures and faucets in restaurants. As we can notice from the events, it was negotiated for a short while and will also be accomplished in a few days. At Connections, we only have to identify the several interveners under project. For this reason, a project work has been defined which, in terms of realization, should be seen as a whole, and only the inputs were broken down, that is, only labor and material supplies, as we shall see. Let's see it then. By entering Projects Works and introducing the project type OCX, code X% in the criteria panel, we get a list with some projects. Let us focus on the project XO1320. We see the identification and description of the project. The interveners are in the central part, and the customer is Granimar. Note that these acronyms, DO, PI, etc., are defined for each organization and for the language in use. Placing the cursor on them shows their meanings. For instance, DO stands for Work Developer, PI, Lighting Designer, and so on. On the right are dates and relevant events. It all started on August 7th, 2001, with a meeting with the developer. We received the adjudication call the following day, and we pledged ourselves to delivering the project on the 17th. Let's now consider two aspects of the module project's works. No items to be realized, we have already mentioned this, and 6 inputs. We have immediate access to inputs by clicking on them. Here we have the labor of an electrician and the materials needed broken down into quantity and value. Then, documents concerning internal requests or purchase of materials, as well as the allocation of an electrician, shall be issued based on these inputs. The billing shall be issued as soon as the work has been completed. All these documents will be connected to the project and will reflect on it for control purposes. Also, we may later on have access to those documents based on the identification of the project. This example of a project with inputs only can be generalized for applications in a number of areas. One of these areas consists of pooled projects or even totally funded by financing entities. This area has been growing in a very significant way in the countries where we operate. In such cases, financing entities commit themselves to paying part or all of the inputs. Initially, the definition of inputs will allow the cost estimation of the project and the elaboration of the proposal to the financing entity. Then, the respective payments will be requested to the financing entity during the accomplishment of the project and as inputs are being used. There are, however, financing entities that are more demanding in terms of requesting the project to be broken down into items to be realized, and their relation with the inputs used. In such cases, we must take both aspects of the project into account, that is, the aspect regarding the items to be realized and the one regarding inputs. It is this type of project work, including those two aspects, that we shall illustrate in a short while. Let's see now a project with items to be realized and inputs. This project will also demand the use of the relations between the items and inputs previously recorded into the system, so as to allow the automatic generation of inputs. This is about the installation of some steel and PVC pipes. It has also been quickly negotiated, as we can see from the events, and will also be accomplished in about 2 months' time. Let's see it then. We see here the demo work 2, XO2477. The general information is similar to that seen before. There is a short description of the project on the left. The interveners are in the middle, and events on the right. What is different is that there are 7 items to be realized in this case. We get the 7 items by just clicking on them. We notice that these items follow a hierarchical structure in which there are classification levels, that is, electrical and hydraulic installations. The steel pipes will be placed under electrical wiring, and the PVC pipes under hydraulic systems. Now, let's take a look at this item, a 2.5-inch galvanized steel pipe. The composition K903007 is associated with it in this column. We can see that it comprises 4 components if we click on it: helper and fireman labor, and 2 materials, pipe and sealing tape. There is a coefficient next to the components. It is the amount of the component consumed per unit of the item to be realized. So based on composition, and as long as data are provided, the application can calculate the inputs and there is no need for them to be registered. Going back to the project itself and clicking on Inputs, we see the 18 inputs that were automatically calculated based on the compositions. This example of a simple project with items to be realized can be generalized and applied to very diverse areas, including the above for pooling financing purposes. Naturally, the prior feeding of compositions in order to automate the generation of inputs is optional, and is only justified when project items often reuse these compositions. In projects with items to be realized, it's possible to load inputs and even their relation with the items themselves, without the need of resorting to compositions. Larger projects distinguish from small ones by having up to hundreds of items, and compositions may have dozens of components. However, they basically work as mentioned earlier. Here's an example of greater complexity in terms of items to be realized and compositions. As we can see in this work, there are more items to be realized, some of which have compositions. When looking at these more complex projects, the colors are very helpful, whether in contrasting items that belong to groups from elementary items, which in here are displayed in lighter colors, or in enhancing the columns. Let's now take a look at the item concrete ballast of this project. Its composition is defined as K010416 at the architecture of products under the options, connections and compositions. We can check the composition of this item by clicking on it. In this composition, in addition to labor and materials, are equipment too, namely a concrete mixer, a wheelbarrow, and an immersion vibrator. We have already seen this. This is just a more complex composition. Compositions may have many more components in real projects. Larger projects are often associated with some concepts that may be very useful when their use is justified. They are as follows: distribution of items and aggregation of items and inputs. The distribution of items consists in taking into account that the project will run over n periods of time, say 8 months, and then the items and even the inputs will be distributed throughout those months. This will allow us to get different types of schedules: realization schedules, consumption schedules, expenditure schedules, as well as revenue schedules. Let's see then the distribution of items and some schedules as well. By clicking on the option Physical Distribution of Items and entering the criteria, we get a list with the distribution of items. We see for the Fortaleza Trade Center project the list broken down into items, and each item is also divided into time periods: period 1, period 2. If we scroll down the list, we see that the item concrete ballast is spread over a period of 5 months. There are dates for each period, numbers of days, the distribution percentage of the item during that time period, quantities, and values. The first part of the list shows the distribution of items regarding estimated costs, and the second part shows the distribution of estimated revenues. Those schedules are generated based on such distributions. Let's go back to the menu and choose, for instance, the expenditure schedule. When we click on the OK button, the system generates the schedule based on the distribution of items. And here is the schedule. The aggregation of items and inputs consists of taking them transversally to projects. In other words, regardless of each project, the organization may be interested in analyzing and controlling inputs. For example, how much is being spent on labor and certain materials and equipment in a given period of time. This can also be applied to items. For example, regardless of the project, it is important to know how much is being spent on earthworks, foundations, etc. in a given period of time. A particular case that matters to public bodies is that aggregations can be done from the perspective of budget headings. In other words, regardless of the project, it is possible to be aware of the value of the inputs per budget heading. Still regarding this issue, the organization may be interested in exploiting the ABC statistics, whether in terms of inputs or items. Documents of all kinds are permanently associated with projects' works throughout their life cycle. Note that documents are usually generated in other modules, although they are integrated with the module project's works. For example, under the scope of the module consumption regarding internal requests of inputs and their delivery bills. Under the scope of the module purchases regarding purchases of inputs, their orders, way bills, and third parties invoices. And under the scope of the module sales regarding the issuance of invoices. Projects' works are reflected in accounting, budgets, and so on, through documents and their reflections. There are still other modules that can contribute to a fuller use of the module project works. Human resources, equipment and vehicles, and other resources, their allocations and imputations to projects' works. Timesheets regarding the specific allocation of time, etc. Here is a list of documents associated with projects' works. Here we are at the menu again. Let's choose the option Documents per Project. Entering the criteria screen, we filter contract documents of the type OCX. We get a list of documents arranged by project work. Here is the project work as the title for each group of documents. Note that these documents have been generated in other modules, reason why there are sales invoices billing portions of 20% to the warehouse as internal requests. Still regarding the connection between documents and project works, it is important to emphasize the measurement reports, in which the degree of achievement of a project's works is recorded. Measurement reports are also a type of document and are integrated in the repository of documents associated with project's works, benefiting from all the treatment facilities that documents have at their disposal. One of these facilities concerns the fact that all these types of documents can be parameterized in order to reflect themselves on the control panels of projects' works and their items. Let's see it. Upon viewing this project work and heading for the control panel, we find 4 basic controls that are fed by treasury documents and transactions: control of quantities, control of expenditures, revenues, and profitability. The controls equate what has been estimated, realized, and paid up. What has been paid up is equated when there are payments, receipts, namely, the estimated against the realized and the realized against the paid up, allow critical controls and alerts for the sound management of projects. When the business at issue is a project work, these controls are essential and can never be overlooked. Otherwise, the organization may risk sinking into a series of works to be done, even if they have already been paid up, and expenses not backed up by revenues. Finally, the documents related to projects works are reflected in the various subsystems as per an ERP logical pattern. Let's see it. The documents are reflected in several subsystems with highlight to accounting, budget, treasury, fixed assets, and stocks. Thus, projects works are also integrated in an ERP logical pattern through associated documents. In short, we believe what has been exposed has helped you to elucidate the following. First, the module Projects Works presents a whole range of facilities suitable for the definition and recording of projects works, preparation of cost estimates, planning, follow-ups, and statistics. Second, it relies on other modules in order to, in an integrated manner, to get projects works accomplished, as well as integrate them into the overall application system as per an ERP logical pattern. We have presented in this video the module for the management of projects works, along with the necessary detail for a first assessment on the interest of your organization. We must emphasize that, according to the organization at issue, we may be facing simple projects to be started immediately, or complex projects that include a variety of projects works, as well as larger projects works. Thus, this dialogue can be deepened, aiming at a better analysis of your needs and the responses we have to them. We and the network of partners we integrate are fully prepared to listen to and support you.